The flour dust caught in the morning sunlight streaming through the bakery window, and Clara Everhart watched it dance while her hands worked the dough with practiced efficiency, knowing that in less than an hour, the first cruel comment of the day would arrive with Mrs. Patterson's order for dinner rolls. Clara had owned the only bakery in Custer, South Dakota since 1878, inheriting it from her aunt, who had raised her after consumption took both her parents when she was just 7 years old. Now, at 24 years old in the spring of 1885, Clara had built a reputation for producing the finest bread, pastries, and cakes in the Black Hills region. Yet that reputation meant nothing compared to the weight that settled on people's tongues when they spoke about her body instead of her craft. She was a large woman. There was no denying that truth. Her frame carried substantial weight that made her dresses difficult to purchase ready-made, requiring the services of Mrs. Chen, the Chinese seamstress on 3rd Street who never commented on measurements, only worked with quiet efficiency and fair prices. Clara's arms were thick and strong from years of kneading dough, her face round and full with cheeks that flushed pink from the heat of the ovens. Her dark blonde hair she kept pinned back in a practical bun, and her green eyes held both kindness and the weariness of someone who had heard too many cutting remarks disguised as concerns about her health or marital prospects. The bell above the bakery door chimed at exactly 7 in the morning, right on schedule. Margaret Patterson swept in with her usual air of superiority, her thin frame draped in expensive fabric that spoke of her husband's successful cattle operation just outside town. "Good morning, Clara," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying that particular tone of false sweetness that preceded cruelty. "I need 3 dozen dinner rolls for Thursday evening. We are entertaining some businessmen from Rapid City, and I want everything to be perfect. Well, the food at least. I cannot control all aspects of presentation, of course." Clara wiped her hands on her apron and moved to write down the order in her ledger. 3 dozen dinner rolls for Thursday. Would you like the honey wheat or the traditional white? The white, naturally. Though I must say, Clara, you really should consider how much of your own product you are sampling. I saw Dr. Morrison yesterday, and he mentioned that consumption of excessive bread can lead to all manner of health complications. Of course, he was speaking generally, but I could not help but think of you. Mrs. Patterson's eyes traveled deliberately over Clara's body with thinly veiled disgust. The words stung as they always did, but Clara had learned years ago that showing pain only encouraged more cruelty. "I will have them ready by Thursday morning. That will be $2. Mrs. Patterson placed the coins on the counter with exaggerated care, as if avoiding physical contact. "You know, my husband's ranch hand, Tom, is looking for a wife. Of course, he is not much to look at himself, lost an eye in a riding accident and has that terrible limp. Perhaps you two might suit each other, both being somewhat unfortunate in your physical circumstances." Clara's jaw tightened, but she maintained her composure. "I will see you Thursday, Mrs. Patterson." After the woman left, Clara allowed herself a moment of stillness, her hands flat on the counter, breathing slowly through her nose. This was her life, had been her life for years. She created beauty and nourishment with her hands, and in return received mockery and pity from people who never bothered to see past her appearance. The morning continued with its usual rhythm. Mr. Henderson came in for his daily sourdough loaf, and at least had the decency to simply conduct his business without commentary. Young Timothy Brooks arrived to collect the pastries his mother had ordered, his teenage awkwardness making him stare at his feet rather than acknowledge Clara directly, as if obesity might be contagious. Sarah Whitmore, one of the few people in town who treated Clara with genuine kindness, stopped by for cinnamon rolls and spent 10 minutes sharing gossip about the new schoolteacher before rushing off to her job at the general store. By noon, Clara had endured 3 more veiled insults, one from Pastor Williams, who suggested she attend the church's temperance meetings as they also discussed gluttony as a sin, and 2 from a pair of young women who whispered loudly enough for her to hear their speculation about whether the bakery floor might collapse under her weight. She was rolling out pie dough when the bell chimed again around 1 o'clock. Clara glanced up and saw a man she did not recognize, which was unusual in a town the size of Custer. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who spent his days working hard physical labor. His dark brown hair needed a trim, curling slightly at his collar, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his angular jaw. His eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, surveyed the bakery with open appreciation. He wore the practical clothing of a working cowboy: denim pants, worn boots, a simple cotton shirt, and a leather vest. Dust from the trail covered him, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested capability without arrogance. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and rough around the edges, carrying an accent that suggested origins in Texas or perhaps Oklahoma Territory. "I just rode into town, and I have been smelling bread for the last mile. I would be much obliged if you could sell me whatever you might have available. I have been on the trail for near a week, and my supplies ran out 2 days ago." Clara found herself momentarily at a loss for words. His gaze met hers directly, without the quick dart away most people employed, without the judgmental assessment she had come to expect. He simply looked at her the way one person looks at another. "I have fresh sourdough from this morning," she finally said, "and some beef and vegetable hand pies I made for the lunch crowd. There are also cinnamon rolls, apple turnovers, and a few slices of buttermilk pie." "I will take 2 loaves of the sourdough, 4 of those hand pies, and 2 cinnamon rolls," he said, approaching the counter. "And maybe one of those turnovers. Actually, make that 2 turnovers. I am powerful hungry." Clara began gathering his order, wrapping the items carefully in brown paper. "Are you just passing through Custer, or will you be staying?" "Depends on whether I can find work," he replied. "Name is Frank Vance. I have been working cattle drives and ranch work since I was 14, but I am looking to settle somewhere. Getting tired of always moving, never having a place to call home. A fellow in Rapid City said there might be ranches hiring around here." "The Patterson Ranch usually needs hands," Clara offered, placing his order on the counter. "And the Morrison family has a large operation north of town. That will be $3.50. Frank pulled out his money and counted out the bills, adding an extra $1. "For your trouble, and because that bread smells better than anything I have encountered in months." "I cannot accept a tip that large," Clara protested. "Then consider it payment for information about the town and work prospects," Frank said with a slight smile that created creases at the corners of his eyes. "Seems fair to me." Before Clara could respond, the bell chimed again, and 3 cowboys she recognized as Patterson Ranch hands swaggered in. They were young men, probably no older than 22 or 23, full of bravado and meanness that came from too much whiskey and not enough discipline. "Well, look at that," one of them, Jake Morrison, the ranch owner's nephew, announced loudly. "Looks like our baker has found herself an admirer. Tell me, stranger, did you mistake her for a cow from behind? Easy mistake to make, given the size." The other 2 erupted in laughter. Frank's expression transformed instantly, his casual friendliness replaced by something cold and dangerous. "You want to repeat that?" Frank asked quietly. "Jake, emboldened by his friends and misreading the warning in Frank's tone, stepped closer. "I said she looks like a cow. Maybe even a whole herd. We are just amazed the floor has not given way yet. We take bets on it down at the saloon." What happened next occurred so quickly that Clara barely processed it. Frank's fist connected with Jake's jaw with a sickening crack, sending the young man sprawling backward into his companions. Before they could react, Frank had closed the distance, grabbing the second cowboy by his shirt front. "The lady runs a business establishment and deserves respect," Frank said, his voice deadly calm. "You will apologize and then you will leave." "You broke my jaw," Jake moaned from the floor, his words slurred. "I barely tapped you." "Your jaw is not broken, just bruised, which is more than you deserve." Frank released the second cowboy and turned his attention back to Jake. "I am waiting for that apology." Jake scrambled to his feet, his face already swelling. "I am sorry," he muttered, not meeting Clara's eyes. "Louder, and look at her when you say it." "I am sorry, Miss Everhart," Jake said, finally glancing in her direction before fleeing through the door with his friends close behind. Silence filled the bakery. Clara stood frozen behind her counter, hands trembling slightly. In all her years of enduring mockery, no one had ever defended her. Not once. "I apologize for causing a scene in your establishment," Frank said, turning back to her. His expression had softened again, the dangerous edge completely gone. "But I cannot abide that kind of disrespect." "You did not have to do that," Clara whispered. "Yes, madam, I did. My mother raised me to stand up for people who deserve standing up for, and you have done nothing to warrant that kind of treatment." He picked up his wrapped parcels. "Thank you for the food. I expect I will be seeing you again soon." After he left, Clara sank onto the stool she kept behind the counter, her legs suddenly weak. She pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. Something had shifted in her world, some fundamental assumption about how things were supposed to be, and she found herself equal parts grateful and terrified. The afternoon passed in a blur. News of the altercation spread through town with the speed of wildfire, and Clara received several visitors who came specifically to discuss it rather than purchase baked goods. The consensus seemed to be that Frank Vance had acted rashly and would likely find himself unwelcome at the Patterson Ranch, which was unfortunate for a drifter looking for work. Clara closed the bakery at 6, as she did every evening, and climbed the stairs to her small apartment above the shop. The space consisted of a bedroom, a sitting area, and a tiny kitchen she rarely used since she spent most of her waking hours in the bakery below. She prepared a simple dinner of soup and bread, but found she had little appetite, her mind continuously returning to the moment when Frank's expression had turned cold at Jake's insults. No one had ever defended her like that. Her aunt had loved her, but believed that ignoring cruelty was the best response, that drawing attention to insults only encouraged more of them. Sarah Whitmore was kind, but never confronted the people who spoke cruelly. Clara had built her entire adult life around the assumption that her body made her unworthy of defense, that the mockery was something she had to endure as the price of existing in a world that found her physically unacceptable. She did not sleep well that night, her dreams filled with confusing images of blue-gray eyes and the sound of fist meeting flesh. The next morning, Clara arrived in the bakery at 4:30, as she always did, to begin the day's baking. She had just pulled the first loaves from the oven when the bell chimed at 6:15, more than half an hour before she officially opened. Frank Vance stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking apologetic. "I know you are not open yet, but I wanted to speak with you before the town wakes up." Clara set down the bread pans and wiped her hands on her apron, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Is something wrong?" "I wanted to apologize if my actions yesterday caused you trouble," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "I heard around town that I might have made things harder for you by confronting those boys." "You heard correctly," Clara said honestly. "Mrs. Patterson sent her husband to inform me that they will no longer be purchasing from my bakery. That was a substantial portion of my business." Frank's jaw tightened. "That is not right. You did nothing wrong. But you did it on my behalf, so in their eyes I am complicit." Clara moved to the counter, needing the familiar barrier between them. "I appreciate what you did, truly, but you did not understand the situation. This town tolerates me because I stay in my place, because I accept their cruelty without complaint. When someone like you stands up for me, it upsets the balance." "That is the most backward thing I have ever heard," Frank said flatly. "Perhaps, but it is the reality I live with." They stood in silence for a moment. Clara noticed details she had missed the day before. The way his calloused hands worried the brim of his hat. A small scar through his left eyebrow. The way he stood with his weight slightly on his right leg, suggesting an old injury to his left. "I found work," Frank said finally. "The Chen family, they have a ranch about 5 miles west of here. They raise horses, supply the cavalry at Fort Meade. Mr. Chen hired me yesterday evening. He said his usual ranch hand moved to California, and he needs someone who knows horses. I am starting today." "The Chen ranch is good people," Clara said, meaning it. The Chen family faced their own share of prejudice, being Chinese in a predominantly white town, but they had built a successful horse breeding operation through sheer skill and determination. "Mrs. Chen does my dressmaking. She mentioned that," Frank said you were the kindest woman in Custer. Her words, not mine, though I am inclined to agree based on what little I have seen." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks again. "I am simply polite." "There is nothing simple about choosing kindness when the world is cruel to you," Frank replied. He placed his hat back on his head. "I will let you get back to work. I just wanted to make sure I had not caused you harm." "Wait," Clara said as he turned toward the door. "Would you like some breakfast? I have fresh cinnamon rolls and I could make coffee." Frank's face transformed with a genuine smile that made him look younger. "I would like that very much." They sat at one of the 2 small tables Clara kept in the bakery's front area, an odd pair sharing coffee and cinnamon rolls in the pre-dawn quiet. Frank talked about his life, how he had grown up in Texas on a small ranch that his father lost to debt when Frank was 15. His mother had died giving birth to his younger sister, who only lived 3 days. His father drank himself to death 2 years after losing the ranch. Frank had been working cattle drives and ranch jobs ever since, moving from place to place, never finding anywhere that felt like home. "What about you?" Frank asked. "Have you always lived in Custer?" Clara told him about her parents, about her aunt who had taken her in and taught her to bake, about inheriting the bakery at 19 when her aunt's heart simply stopped one night in her sleep. She told him about building the business, about the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands, about the loneliness of being the subject of constant mockery. "I am fat," she said bluntly. "That is the word people use when I cannot hear them, and sometimes when I can. In a world where women are supposed to be delicate and decorative, I am neither. I take up space, I am visible, and people cannot seem to forgive me for it." Frank was quiet for a moment, his coffee cup cradled in his hands. "My mother was a large woman too," he said finally. "My father loved her something fierce. I remember when I was maybe 10, some traveling salesman made a comment about her size. My father knocked him flat, then picked him up and made him apologize. Later, I asked my father why he got so angry. He said that my mother was the finest person he had ever known, that she had a heart big enough to love everyone she met, and that anyone who could not see past her body to the person inside was a fool not worth knowing. Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was before the drink took him. Grief does strange things to people. Frank met her gaze. But he was right about my mother, and from what I can see, you are cut from similar cloth. You have a skill that feeds this whole town, and they mock you for it. That is not a reflection on you. That is a reflection on them. The bell chimed as the first legitimate customer of the day arrived, Mrs. Henderson collecting bread for her family. Clara stood quickly, wiping at her eyes and moving behind the counter to conduct business. When she finished and turned back around, Frank was gone, his coffee cup washed and left to dry on the towel beside the small sink in the corner. Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Frank would arrive at the bakery each morning around 6, bringing with him news of his work at the Chen Ranch and an easy conversation that Clara found herself craving. They would share coffee and whatever Clara had fresh from the ovens, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about the horses he was working with, a particular mare named Rosie who was proving difficult to train. She told him about her experiments with different bread recipes, her dream of maybe expanding the bakery someday. Other customers noticed, of course. In a town the size of Custer, everything was noticed and discussed. The comments became more pointed, the mockery more cruel. Mrs. Patterson made a show of walking past the bakery to purchase inferior bread from the general store. A group of young women began gathering across the street, giggling and pointing when Frank arrived each morning. Pastor Williams gave a sermon about gluttony and the sin of pride, staring directly at Clara throughout. Clara waited for Frank to hear enough gossip, to understand that associating with her would damage his reputation in town, to stop coming. But he appeared every morning without fail, and his defense of her became legendary. When someone made a cutting remark within his hearing, Frank would respond with such cold precision that the speaker inevitably found themselves apologizing. He never raised his voice, never became violent again after that first day, but his mere presence became a shield that Clara had never experienced before. 3 weeks after Frank arrived in Custer, he appeared at the bakery on a Sunday afternoon, the one day Clara closed the shop. She was upstairs in her apartment, reading a novel she had ordered from a catalog, when she heard knocking at the street entrance. She descended the stairs and opened the door to find Frank standing there in clean clothes, his hair still damp from a recent washing. "I apologize for disturbing your day off," he said, "but I was wondering if you might like to take a walk. It is beautiful outside, and I thought you might enjoy seeing the creek that runs along the Chen property. It is only about a mile walk from here." Clara hesitated. Being seen walking with Frank would certainly create more gossip, more cruelty. But as she looked at his hopeful expression, at the effort he had clearly put into his appearance, she found she did not care about the gossip anymore. "Let me get my shawl," she said. They walked through town and out along the western road, past the small houses on the outskirts that gradually gave way to open grassland. The Black Hills rose in the distance, dark shapes against the spring sky. Wildflowers dotted the prairie, blues and yellows and purples that swayed in the gentle breeze. The air smelled of grass and earth and possibility. "I have been thinking," Frank said as they walked, "about what you said that first morning. About how you stay in your place, about accepting the cruelty to keep the peace." "It is simply reality," Clara said quietly. "No, it is a choice you have made because you have been alone, but you are not alone anymore." Frank stopped walking and turned to face her. "I know I have not been in Custer long. I know you probably think I am crazy for saying this, but Clara, I have been moving my whole adult life, looking for something I could not name. And then I walked into your bakery, and it was like everything suddenly made sense. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Frank, you barely know me. I know you get up at 4:30 every morning to make bread that feeds this whole town. I know you treat everyone with kindness even when they treat you with cruelty. I know you have the most beautiful laugh I have ever heard, and that you always give extra pastries to Mrs. Thompson's children because you know their father drinks away his wages. I know that you put a bowl of water outside your bakery door every evening for stray dogs. I know that you are kind and skilled and resilient in ways that humble me. He took a breath. I know that when I am with you, I feel like I have finally found home. People will say terrible things, Clara whispered. They already are. They say you are only interested in me because you are desperate or because you have some kind of perverse appetite. They say I must be paying you, or that you have brain damage from too many falls from horses. I do not care what they say, but I do. Clara turned away from him, hugging herself. Frank, you are a handsome man. You could have your pick of women in this territory. Women who are beautiful and socially acceptable, who would not subject you to mockery and exclusion. Why would you choose to saddle yourself with me? She heard him step closer, felt his hand gently touch her shoulder. Turn around, Clara. She did, slowly, and found him looking at her with such raw honesty that it stole her breath. You think I do not see your beauty? He asked softly. Clara, you are beautiful. Your eyes are the color of spring grass, and they light up when you talk about baking. Your smile could warm the coldest winter day. Your hands create miracles from flour and water. Your heart is bigger than this whole prairie. And yes, you are a large woman. That is simply a fact, like the fact that I am tall, or that I have a scar through my eyebrow from where a bull caught me when I was 16. It is part of who you are, but it does not define who you are. Society says otherwise, Clara said, but her voice lacked conviction. Society is wrong. Frank's hand moved from her shoulder to gently cup her cheek. I am 32 years old, Clara. I have known many women in my life. Pretty women, charming women, women who turned heads when they walked into a room. But I have never met anyone who made me feel like you do. Like I am seeing something precious that the rest of the world is too blind to recognize. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. I am falling in love with you, Clara Everhart. Maybe I have been since the moment I tasted your bread and realized that someone who could create something that good must have a soul worth knowing. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. The only question is whether you might be willing to give me a chance. To let me prove that I mean what I say. Clara had spent her entire adult life believing that love was not meant for her, that her body had disqualified her from that fundamental human experience. She had built walls around her heart, had learned to find satisfaction in her work rather than in connection with another person. But standing there in the spring sunshine with Frank's hand warm against her face, those walls crumbled like poorly made pie crust. I am afraid, she admitted. I am afraid of believing you and then discovering it was all a mistake or a joke. Then let me prove it to you day by day until you are not afraid anymore. Frank smiled. I am a patient man, Clara. I will wait as long as you need. What if I am willing to try? The words came out barely above a whisper. What if I want to believe you? Then I would ask if I might court you properly, with walks like this one and picnics, and whatever else might make you happy. And eventually, if you find that you return my feelings, I would ask you to marry me. You are talking about marriage already. Clara felt dizzy with the speed of it all. I am a man who knows what he wants when he finds it, Frank said. But I am not asking you to marry me today. I am just asking if you might be willing to see where this could lead. Clara thought about her empty apartment above the bakery, about years of loneliness stretched out before her. She thought about Frank's morning visits, about how he made her laugh, about how his presence had changed something fundamental in her world. She thought about his hand against her face and the sincerity in his eyes. "Yes," she said, "I would like to see where this could lead." Frank's smile was like sunrise, brilliant and full of promise. "May I kiss you?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Frank leaned down, mindful of their height difference, and pressed his lips to hers. It was gentle and brief, nothing improper, but it felt like a door opening onto a future Clara had never dared to imagine. They continued their walk to the creek, and Frank showed her the horses in the Chen pastures, pointing out Rosie and explaining his training methods. Clara found herself relaxing in his company, the fear and doubt gradually receding in the face of his steady presence. They talked about their hopes for the future, about Frank's dream of eventually owning his own small ranch, about Clara's desire to write a cookbook of her recipes. "You should do that," Frank said enthusiastically. "You have recipes that people would pay good money to learn. You could sell it through catalogs, reach people all over the country." "It is just a dream," Clara said. "Dreams are important. They give us something to work toward." He squeezed her hand gently. "I will help you if you want. I have decent penmanship. I could write things down while you dictate recipes." The simple offer, his willingness to participate in her dream, touched Clara deeply. They walked back to town as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Frank left her at her door with another chaste kiss and a promise to see her in the morning. The gossip intensified over the following weeks. Clara heard all of it, filtered through Sarah Whitmore, who seemed to feel obligated to keep Clara informed. Apparently, the town was divided into camps. Some people thought Frank was a con man after Clara's money, unaware that she barely made enough from the bakery to support herself. Others insisted he must have some mental deficiency. A particularly ugly rumor suggested he was simply using Clara for regular meals until something better came along. But Frank continued to court her with single-minded determination. He appeared every morning for coffee and pastries, walked her home every evening after she closed the shop, spent his Sundays taking her on excursions around the countryside. He brought her wildflowers, listened to her talk about recipes, told her stories about his work with the horses. He defended her against cruelty so consistently that eventually some people stopped making comments in public, though Clara knew the private mockery continued. Mrs. Chen invited them to Sunday dinner 6 weeks into their courtship, and Clara found herself welcomed into the Chen family with a warmth she had rarely experienced. Mr. Chen spoke enthusiastically about Frank's skill with horses, while Mrs. Chen and her teenage daughter Min asked Clara about recipes and praised her dressmaking designs. It was an evening of genuine acceptance, and Clara found herself relaxing in ways she had not known she needed. "Frank is good man," Mrs. Chen said as she and Clara did dishes together after the meal. "He work hard, he have honor. My husband says Frank knows horses better than anyone he has ever employed." "He is very kind," Clara agreed. "More than kind. He sees you, truly sees you. That is rare." Mrs. Chen's hand stilled in the dishwater. "I know what it is like to face prejudice, to have people judge you before they know you. It is hard path to walk, but walking it with someone who loves you makes all difference." Clara met the older woman's eyes and saw understanding there, a kinship born of shared experience. "How do you know he loves me? It has only been 6 weeks." Mrs. Chen smiled. "He looks at you the way my husband still looks at me after 23 years of marriage, like you are most precious thing in his world." That night, Clara lay in bed thinking about Mrs. Chen's words. She was falling in love with Frank. She could admit that to herself now. The fear had not completely disappeared, but it had been joined by something stronger, a hope that maybe she deserved this, deserved him, deserved happiness. 2 weeks later, on a warm evening in early June, Frank asked if he could speak with her after she closed the bakery. They sat at one of the small tables, the day's leftover pastries between them, and Frank took both her hands in his. "I know it has not been that long," he started, "but Clara, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. You are what I have been searching for all these years. You are home and hope and everything good I could imagine. I love you. I am in love with you completely and entirely. And I would be honored if you would agree to marry me." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Are you absolutely sure? Because once we marry, Frank, you will be tied to me. People will not stop talking. They will not suddenly accept me because I have a husband. If anything, they might turn their cruelty on you too. I know. And I do not care. Clara, I would rather face a lifetime of small-minded gossip with you than spend another day without you in my life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "This was my mother's wedding ring. It is all I have left of her. I would like you to have it if you will accept my proposal." Clara looked at the ring, small and worn and precious, then back at Frank's face. His eyes held such hope, such love, that her remaining doubts finally crumbled completely. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Frank stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. Clara pressed her face against his chest and felt the steady beat of his heart, solid and real in hers. When they finally drew apart, Frank slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. They decided on a simple wedding in 3 weeks, enough time to make arrangements, but not so long that they would have to endure extended speculation and commentary. Pastor Williams agreed to perform the ceremony with obvious reluctance, and a lengthy lecture about the sanctity of marriage. Clara made her own wedding dress with Mrs. Chen's help, a simple design in cream-colored cotton that flattered her figure without trying to disguise it. The Chen family offered their ranch for the reception, a kindness that touched Clara deeply. Sarah Whitmore agreed to stand up with Clara, and Frank asked Mr. Chen to be his best man. They invited the whole town, knowing that most people would not attend, but feeling it important to make the gesture anyway. The days leading up to the wedding were filled with baking, as Clara prepared goods for the reception. Frank spent his evenings with her, helping where he could, his presence a comfort against the intensifying gossip. Several customers stopped patronizing the bakery entirely, declaring they would not support Clara's delusions. But others, particularly some of the working families on the edge of town, began shopping there more frequently, as if silently declaring their support. The morning of her wedding, Clara woke before dawn as always. She had closed the bakery for the day, the first time she had done so for something other than illness. She stood in her small apartment, looking at the wedding dress hanging from the wardrobe door, hardly believing this was real. Sarah arrived at 7 to help her dress and arrange her hair. "You look beautiful," Sarah said sincerely. "Truly, Clara, Frank is a lucky man." "I think I am the lucky one," Clara replied. The ceremony was at 11 o'clock at the small church on Main Street. Clara arrived on foot, having refused Sarah's offer of a buggy. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it walking down Main Street in her wedding dress for everyone to see. The church was more full than she had expected. Many of the working families had come, along with the Chen family and several of Frank's co-workers from other ranches in the area. The Patterson family was notably absent, as were most of the town's more prominent citizens, but Clara found she did not care. The people who mattered were present. Frank stood at the altar in new clothes that Clara knew he had saved 2 months' wages to purchase. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face transformed with such obvious love and joy that Clara felt her own tears starting again. She reached the altar and took his offered hand, feeling the calluses against her palm, the strength in his fingers. Pastor Williams performed a shortened version of the ceremony, clearly eager to conclude the proceedings. But when it came time for the vows, Frank's voice was strong and clear. "I, Frank Vance, take you, Clara Everhart, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you for all the days of my life. I promise to see you, truly see you always, and to build a life with you that reflects the beauty you bring into this world." Clara's voice shook only slightly as she repeated her own vows. "I, Clara Everhart, take you, Frank Vance, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and support you for all the days of my life. I promise to build a home with you, to create beauty with you, and to face whatever challenges come our way with courage. I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Williams said with barely concealed disapproval. "You may kiss your bride." Frank cupped Clara's face in both hands and kissed her thoroughly, to the point that someone in the back pews whistled. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling. The reception at the Chen Ranch was a revelation. Clara had expected an awkward, sparsely attended affair. Instead, she found herself surrounded by warmth and celebration. The Chen family had decorated their barn with wildflowers and ribbons. Tables groaned under the weight of food that Clara and Mrs. Chen had spent days preparing. Someone produced a fiddle, and soon there was dancing. Frank led Clara in a waltz, and though she was not a practiced dancer, he made her feel graceful. "Are you happy?" he asked, his lips close to her ear. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," she admitted. As the sun began to set, Frank and Clara said their goodbyes and rode in a borrowed wagon to the small house Frank had been renting since he arrived in Custer. It was modest, just 4 rooms, but Frank had spent weeks preparing it for Clara's arrival. He had painted the walls, fixed the sagging porch, even built additional shelving in the kitchen. "It is not much," he said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is ours, and eventually when we have saved enough, we will build something bigger." "It is perfect," Clara said, meaning it. After living above the bakery for 5 years, having an actual house felt like luxury. Frank carried her over the threshold, and Clara laughed at the old tradition, at the feeling of being held in his strong arms. He set her down gently in the small parlor and then just looked at her, his expression tender. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," Clara replied, the words feeling less frightening now. "I am still somewhat terrified that I will wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It is not a dream. This is real and it is permanent, and nothing is going to change how I feel about you." Frank pulled her close. "You are my wife, Clara Vance, and I intend to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know how much that means to me." Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, Frank showing Clara a physical tenderness she had never experienced before. He treated her body with reverence, showed her pleasure she had not known was possible, held her afterwards like she was something precious. Clara fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling safe and loved, and finally home. The first weeks of marriage brought adjustments. Clara continued running the bakery, rising at 4:30 each morning. Frank worked long days at the Chen Ranch but always made time to stop by the bakery for lunch. They spent their evenings together, cooking dinner, talking about their days, making plans for their future. Clara taught Frank to bake bread, laughing at his clumsy attempts to knead dough. Frank brought home a stray dog he found on the road, a mutt with mismatched ears and boundless affection that became Clara's constant companion in the bakery. The town's reaction to their marriage was mixed. Some people seemed to grudgingly accept it, continuing to patronize the bakery and treating Frank with basic civility. Others doubled down on their mockery, making increasingly cruel comments about how long it would take Frank to abandon Clara for a real woman. Mrs. Patterson started a rumor that Frank had only married Clara to gain access to her business assets, unaware that the bakery operated on narrow margins and Clara owned nothing of value beyond her baking equipment. 4 months after the wedding, in late October, Clara began feeling unwell. She found herself exhausted at odd times of day, nauseous in the mornings beyond the usual discomfort from working around food smells. She dismissed it as overwork until Sarah pulled her aside one afternoon. "Clara, have your monthly courses come?" Sarah asked bluntly. Clara paused, actually thinking about it, and realized they had not for over 2 months. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach. "Oh," she whispered. "You should see Dr. Morrison," Sarah said gently. Clara made an appointment reluctantly, knowing that Dr. Morrison was no friend of hers. The doctor confirmed her suspicion with clinical detachment. "You are with child," he said. "Approximately 3 months along, I would estimate. I must warn you, Miss Everhart, that pregnancy places significant strain on the body. Given your weight, you will be at increased risk for complications. I strongly suggest you reduce your food intake and increase your physical activity to minimize these risks." "That is Mrs. Vance," Clara said quietly. "And I walk several miles every day and work in a physically demanding job. I will take your medical advice under consideration." She left the doctor's office feeling a mixture of joy and terror. She was going to have a baby, Frank's baby. But Dr. Morrison's words echoed in her head, feeding old fears about her body, about her worth, about whether she was fit to be a mother. Frank arrived home that evening to find Clara sitting in the darkening parlor, not having lit the lamps. He immediately knelt before her chair, taking her hands. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" "I am pregnant," Clara said, and burst into tears. Frank gathered her into his arms, holding her as she cried. When the storm of emotion finally passed, he pulled back enough to see her face. "Why are you upset? Is something wrong with the baby?" "Dr. Morrison says I am at risk for complications because of my weight. He says I need to reduce my food intake to try to lose weight before the baby comes." Clara wiped at her face. "Frank, what if he is right? What if my body harms our child?" Frank's expression hardened. "That quack said you need to starve yourself while pregnant. That is the most medically ignorant thing I have ever heard." He stood and began pacing. "Tomorrow, we are taking you to Rapid City to see a real doctor. One who knows what he is talking about." "That will cost money we do not have," Clara protested. "I do not care. This is our child we are talking about and your health. We will find the money." They made the trip to Rapid City 2 days later, closing both the bakery and taking a day Frank could not afford to miss from work. The doctor there, a younger man named Dr. Stevens who had trained in Chicago, examined Clara thoroughly. "Your weight is not a health risk," Dr. Stevens said firmly. "You are a strong, healthy woman with no signs of heart problems, no trouble breathing, no issues with your joints or circulation. You run a physically demanding business and are clearly capable of the work. Yes, pregnancy will place demands on your body as it does for any woman, but there is no medical reason you should not have a healthy pregnancy and delivery. Eat well, continue your normal activities as long as you feel comfortable doing so, and listen to your body. That is my advice." Clara felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in days. Truly, truly. Now, I suggest you find a midwife in Custer you feel comfortable with. I know a woman in Rapid City who might be willing to travel if labor progresses too quickly for you to make the journey here, though most first babies take their time." He smiled. "Congratulations to both of you." On the ride home, Clara leaned against Frank's shoulder, feeling his arm around her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not believing Dr. Morrison, for taking me to see someone else. I will always stand up for you, Clara, always." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "We are going to have a baby. I cannot quite believe it. Are you happy about it?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. Terrified, certainly. Worried about whether I will be a good father. But happy, Clara, I am more happy than I knew was possible. They told the Chen family first and were met with enthusiastic congratulations. Mrs. Chen immediately began planning, talking about baby clothes and cradles, sharing advice from her own experiences raising 4 children. Frank and Clara told Sarah next, and within days the news had spread through Custer. The reactions were predictable. Some people offered genuine congratulations. Others made thinly veiled comments about whether the child would inherit Clara's size, or about the strain of childbirth on an obese woman. Mrs. Patterson loudly proclaimed it a tragedy that an innocent child would be raised by such an unfit mother. But Clara found that the cruelty bothered her less now. She had Frank, she had the Chen family, she had Sarah, she had a baby growing inside her. The opinions of small-minded people seemed less important in the face of those blessings. As winter settled over the Black Hills, Clara continued working in the bakery, though Frank insisted on hiring Sarah's teenage nephew to help with the heavy lifting. Her body changed gradually, her stomach swelling with the baby's growth. Frank treated her pregnancy with reverent care, constantly asking if she needed anything, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her when the fears became overwhelming. They spent evenings discussing names, planning for the future, dreaming about who their child might become. Frank built a cradle from pine wood, working on it every night for weeks until it was perfectly smooth and safe. Clara sewed tiny clothes with Mrs. Chen's guidance, marveling at how small they were. "What if I cannot love it enough?" Clara asked one night in late February, her hands on her swollen belly. "What if I am too broken from all the cruelty to be a good mother?" "You are the kindest person I know," Frank said firmly. "You have endured years of mockery and responded with grace. You give extra food to families who cannot afford it. You take care of stray animals. You have so much love inside you, Clara. This baby is going to be so lucky to have you as a mother." Labor began on a cold March morning in 1886. Clara was in the bakery when the first contraction hit, strong enough to make her gasp. She sent Sarah's nephew running for Frank and for Mrs. Chen, who had agreed to serve as midwife. By the time they arrived, the contractions were coming regularly. Frank half-carried Clara to their house, his face pale with worry. Mrs. Chen took charge immediately, setting water to boil, laying out clean linens, her calm competence a balm against the fear. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Clara screamed and cursed and cried, convinced she was dying. Frank held her hand through it all, letting her squeeze until his fingers went numb, whispering encouragements even as his own terror showed in his eyes. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day, a baby's cry filled the small house. Mrs. Chen worked efficiently, cutting the cord and cleaning the infant before placing the tiny bundle in Clara's arms. "A boy," Mrs. Chen said with a tired smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Clara looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, at his perfect fingers that grasped at air. Love flooded through her so intensely it hurt, a fierce protective instinct unlike anything she had ever felt. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." Frank leaned over them, one hand gentle on his son's head, the other around Clara's shoulders. Tears ran unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect." They named him Thomas after Frank's father, with the middle name James for Clara's father. Thomas James Vance entered the world weighing 7.5 pounds, with a healthy set of lungs and his father's blue-gray eyes. The first weeks with a newborn were exhausting in ways Clara had not anticipated. Thomas needed feeding every few hours, day and night. He cried for reasons Clara could not always decipher. Clara's body ached from the birth, and she felt constantly overwhelmed. But Frank was an involved father in ways unusual for the time, waking with her for night feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint. "My father was not around much," Frank explained one night as he rocked Thomas back to sleep. "He was always working, always chasing the next opportunity. I do not want that for our son. I want him to know both his parents love him, that we are present in his life." Clara had to close the bakery for a month after Thomas's birth, something that ate into their already tight finances. But Frank took extra work when he could find it, and they made do. When Clara finally reopened in late April, she brought Thomas with her, keeping him in a basket behind the counter where she could watch him while she worked. The reaction from customers was mixed. Some cooed over the baby, genuinely happy for Clara and Frank. Others made comments about how the child would be better off with a wet nurse, implying Clara's body was not fit for motherhood. Mrs. Patterson went so far as to suggest to Pastor Williams that Thomas should be removed from Clara's care for his own safety. The gossip reached Frank, and he appeared at the bakery one afternoon with a fury Clara had not seen since those first days when he had punched Jake Morrison. "We are going to the Patterson ranch," he announced. "Now, Frank, what are you talking about? Mrs. Patterson has been telling people you are an unfit mother, that Thomas is in danger. She has been to see Pastor Williams about having the church elders intervene." Frank's jaw was tight. "I will not tolerate it. Not anymore." Clara closed the bakery early, bundled Thomas in blankets, and climbed into the wagon Frank had borrowed. They rode to the Patterson ranch in tense silence, Frank's hands tight on the reins. When they arrived, Frank helped Clara down and they approached the imposing house together. Mrs. Patterson answered Frank's knock herself, her expression immediately becoming dismissive when she saw who stood there. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance, what an unexpected visit." "We need to speak with you and your husband," Frank said, his voice carefully controlled. "Now." Something in his tone made Mrs. Patterson step back, allowing them entry. She led them to a parlor where Mr. Patterson sat reading a newspaper. The ranch owner looked up with mild surprise. "Vance, what brings you here?" "Your wife has been spreading rumors about my family," Frank said directly. "She has been suggesting that Clara is an unfit mother, that our son is in danger. I am here to tell you both that this stops now." Mrs. Patterson bristled. "I have simply expressed legitimate concerns to friends about the welfare of an innocent child being raised by someone of such questionable health. My wife's health is none of your concern. Our son is thriving. Clara is an excellent mother." Frank took a step forward. "You have spent years mocking Clara for her appearance. You mock her for existing in a body you find unacceptable. And now that she has found happiness despite your cruelty, you are trying to destroy that too. I want to know why. What has Clara ever done to you to deserve this treatment?" The silence that followed was heavy. Mr. Patterson looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting between his wife and Frank. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone red. "I have done nothing to that woman," Mrs. Patterson said stiffly. Exactly, Clara said quietly, speaking for the first time. Everyone turned to look at her. You have done nothing, Mrs. Patterson. I have baked bread for your family for years. I have made your cakes and pastries for every social event. I have been polite and professional and kind, and you have responded with cruelty. Not because I have wronged you, but because my body offends you. Because I dare to exist in a space you think should be reserved for people who look different than I do. That is not true, Mrs. Patterson protested, but her voice lacked conviction. It is true. And I have spent years accepting it because I thought I had no choice. But I have a family now. I have a husband who loves me and a son who needs me. And I will not let your prejudices hurt them. Clara adjusted Thomas in her arms, the baby sleeping peacefully through the confrontation. You can mock me all you want, Mrs. Patterson. You can refuse to buy my bread. You can spread whatever gossip makes you feel superior. But the moment you come after my child, the moment you try to suggest he is not safe with me, you have crossed a line. I could have your business shut down, Mrs. Patterson said coldly. My husband has influence in this town. Do it, Clara said. Close my bakery. Spread more rumors. Try to destroy my livelihood. But you will not touch my son, and you will not make me believe I am less than I am. Not anymore. Mr. Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Margaret, perhaps you have been somewhat harsh in your assessment of Mrs. Vance's situation. What? Mrs. Patterson turned on her husband. I am simply saying that the woman has always provided quality goods. And from what I can see, her child is healthy and well cared for. Perhaps your concerns are somewhat overstated. He looked at Frank and Clara. I apologize if my wife's comments have caused distress. I can assure you that we will not be involving ourselves in your family matters going forward. It was not a full apology, and it came from the wrong person, but it was something. Frank nodded stiffly. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. We will be going now. They left the Patterson ranch with Clara shaking from adrenaline. Once they were back in the wagon and out of sight of the house, Frank pulled over and took Clara into his arms, careful of the sleeping baby between them. I am so proud of you, he said fiercely. The way you stood up to her, the way you defended yourself and Thomas. Clara, you were magnificent. I was terrified, Clara admitted. Being brave does not mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Frank kissed her forehead. You are the strongest person I know. The confrontation with Mrs. Patterson seemed to shift something in the town's dynamics. Perhaps it was seeing Clara stand up for herself, or perhaps it was the weight of Mr. Patterson's reluctant support, but the cruelty began to lessen. It did not disappear entirely. Clara knew it never would, but it became less frequent, less bold. The bakery's business actually improved, particularly among families who had perhaps felt unable to show support before. Thomas grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone. He had his father's eyes and his mother's temperament, patient and observant. Clara found joy in motherhood she had not anticipated, despite the exhaustion and challenges. Watching Frank with their son, seeing the gentleness with which he handled the tiny boy, fell more in love with her husband every day. When Thomas was 6 months old, Frank came home one evening with news. The Morrison Ranch is selling off some of their land, 5 acres on the eastern edge of their property, including water rights to the creek. I have been talking to the Chen family, and they would be willing to loan us part of the purchase price. I have some money saved. If we can come up with another $200, we could buy it. 5 acres. Frank, what would we do with land? Build a house. A real house, big enough for our family and maybe more children if we are blessed with them. Start a small ranch, raise some cattle and horses. I could work it around my job at the Chen Ranch until we are established enough for it to support us. Frank's eyes were bright with possibility. "We could build something that is ours, Clara. Something to pass down to Thomas and any other children we might have." Clara thought about the dream of a real home, about giving Thomas a better life than either she or Frank had known. $200 is a lot of money. I know, but I think we can do it. If we are careful, if we both work hard, I think we can save it in maybe a year. They set their goal and worked toward it with determination. Clara took on more special orders, baking wedding cakes and fancy pastries that commanded higher prices. Frank took every extra job he could find, working on his days off, staying late when the Chen Ranch needed it. They spent nothing on themselves, every spare penny going into a jar hidden in the back of their kitchen cabinet. It took 14 months, through Thomas's first birthday and into the fall of 1887, but they finally had enough. They purchased the 5 acres, and Frank immediately began planning their house. He spent every spare moment working on it, with help from Mr. Chen and some of Frank's co-workers. It was not large, just 4 rooms plus a loft that could be divided into bedrooms later, but it was well built and sturdy. They moved in on a crisp October afternoon, carrying their modest possessions from the rental house to their new home. Clara stood in the empty front room holding Thomas on her hip and felt tears of gratitude sliding down her face. "It is perfect," she said. "It is ours," Frank replied, wrapping his arms around both of them. "Every board, every nail, every inch of it. No one can take this away from us." Clara continued running the bakery from town, making the commute each day in a small cart pulled by a gentle mare Frank had purchased from the Chen Ranch. It was not easy, managing a business and a toddler and a house, but Clara found she was good at juggling the demands. Frank worked toward building their cattle herd, starting with 3 head and gradually adding more as they could afford it. Life settled into a new rhythm, challenging but satisfying. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic toddler who loved visiting the bakery and helping his mother, usually by making more mess than help. Frank's small ranching operation began to show promise, his skill with animals translating well to cattle management. In the spring of 1889, Clara realized she was pregnant again. This time, the news brought less fear and more excitement. They had proven they could manage one child, had built a stable home and life. A second baby felt like a natural expansion of their family rather than a terrifying unknown. Their daughter was born in early November, an easier labor than Thomas had been. She came into the world with light blonde hair and Clara's green eyes, screaming her displeasure at being cold. They named her Sarah Margaret, after Clara's mother and Frank's mother. "2 children," Frank said wonderingly, holding his infant daughter while 3-year-old Thomas climbed on the bed to see his new sister. "We have 2 children, Clara, an actual family." "You sound surprised," Clara teased gently. "I suppose I am a little. I spent so many years alone, never imagining I would have this. A wife who loves me, children, a home. Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real." Clara understood that feeling. Even now, after 4 years of marriage, she sometimes woke expecting to find it all had been a dream, that she was still alone in her apartment above the bakery, unloved and mocked. But then she would feel Frank beside her, or hear one of the children stirring, and the reality of her blessings would settle over her again. The 1890s brought changes to Custer and to the Vance family. The town grew as more settlers arrived, drawn by gold in the Black Hills and the promise of opportunity. Clara's bakery became an institution, her reputation for quality eventually overcoming the stigma of her size in most people's minds. She was simply Clara the baker, the woman who made the best bread in 3 counties. Frank's cattle operation grew steadily. supplemented by his continued work with the Chen Horse Ranch. He proved to have a gift for breeding, producing stock that commanded good prices at market. Their 5 acres expanded to 20, then 40, as adjacent parcels became available and they had the money to purchase them. Thomas and Sarah grew into capable children who understood the value of work. Thomas showed his father's way with animals, spending every possible moment helping with the cattle and horses. Sarah inherited her mother's talent for baking and could produce a perfect loaf of bread by the time she was 8 years old. In 1895, Clara and Frank's 3rd child arrived, another boy they named David. He was a surprise, coming 10 years after Thomas, but a welcome one. The older children doted on their baby brother, and Clara found she had more patience as a mother in her 30s than she had possessed in her 20s. The cruelty that had defined Clara's early life had not disappeared entirely, but it had been buried under the weight of her success and respectability. She was a businesswoman, a mother, a rancher's wife. The occasional comment about her size still stung, but it no longer defined her existence. In 1898, when Clara was 37 years old, something unexpected happened. A publisher from Chicago who was traveling through the Black Hills stopped at the bakery and tasted her bread. He asked if she had ever considered writing a cookbook, and Clara found herself telling him about the dream she and Frank had discussed 13 years earlier. 6 months later, Clara's cookbook was published. The Western Baker, Recipes from the Black Hills, became modestly successful, selling particularly well to women on the frontier who were trying to create homes in harsh conditions. Clara began receiving letters from readers, thanking her for her clear instructions and reliable recipes. Some letters mentioned that they had heard she was a large woman and wanted her to know that they did not care, that her skill was what mattered. Those letters touched Clara deeply, particularly the ones from other large women who wrote that seeing Clara's success gave them hope that they too could build meaningful lives despite society's cruelty. Frank was enormously proud of her accomplishment, showing the cookbook to everyone he encountered. "My wife is a published author," he would announce, his pride evident. The fact that the cookbook also brought in additional income was helpful as they worked to expand the ranch and provide for 3 children's futures. Thomas turned 18 in 1886 and immediately began working the ranch full-time alongside his father. He had grown into a tall, strong young man with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's kindness. Sarah, at 16, was running the bakery more than Clara was at this point, showing a head for business that suggested she would take over entirely in a few years. David, at 5, was still young but already showing signs of inheriting both his parents' work ethic and his father's skill with animals. On their 15th wedding anniversary in June of 1900, Frank took Clara to the creek where he had first told her he was falling in love with her. They left the children at home and rode out in the evening, the summer air warm and full of the sounds of crickets and frogs. 15 years, Frank said, taking her hand as they stood by the water. 15 years since I walked into your bakery and knew my life was about to change. I thought you were crazy, Clara admitted. This handsome cowboy interested in fat Clara, it seemed impossible. You are still not fat to me, Frank said. You are just Clara, my Clara, the woman I love more today than I did 15 years ago, which I would not have thought possible back then. Clara leaned into him, comfortable with his arm around her shoulders. Do you ever regret it, marrying me, dealing with all the gossip and cruelty? Never, not for a single moment. Frank turned her to face him. Clara, you gave me everything. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. You taught me what love really means, what partnership looks like. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that I was smart enough to see past what other people could not." They kissed there by the creek, two middle-aged people who had built a life together against all odds, who had created something beautiful and lasting from the simple foundation of seeing each other truly. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joys and challenges. Sarah married a young rancher named Peter Ellis in 1902, and by 1904 had given Clara and Frank their first two grandchildren. Thomas courted and married Emily Warner, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, in 1905. David grew into a thoughtful, studious young man who surprised everyone by expressing interest in becoming a veterinarian, leading Frank and Clara to scrimp, and saved to send him to school in Rapid City. Clara gradually transitioned the bakery entirely to Sarah, who proved even more skilled at the business side than Clara had been. The bakery expanded, taking over the space next door, hiring additional help. Sarah's success was a source of profound pride for Clara, watching her daughter build on the foundation Clara had created. Frank's ranch continued to prosper, establishing itself as one of the more successful operations in the area. He and Thomas worked the land together, developing new breeding lines and sustainable grazing practices. Frank was recognized by other ranchers as an expert on horse breeding, often called upon to evaluate stock or provide advice. In 1910, on a cool October evening, Clara and Frank sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the Black Hills in shades of orange and purple. They were both in their 40s now, Frank's dark hair threaded with silver, Clara's face lined with the marks of a life fully lived. Their grandchildren played in the yard while Thomas and Emily prepared dinner in the house. "I have been thinking," Frank said, his hand finding Clara's as it always did, "about that first day I came into your bakery. About how you looked so tired and sad, like you were just enduring life rather than living it." "I was," Clara said quietly. "I had accepted that I would always be alone, that mockery was the price I paid for existing. I had stopped hoping for anything better. Do you remember what I said to you? After those boys insulted you, you said I deserved respect. I said you deserved respect, and I meant it. But Clara, you deserve so much more than just respect. You deserve love and joy and success and everything good this world has to offer. And I am grateful every day that I got to be the one to help you see that." Clara squeezed his hand, tears pricking her eyes even after all these years. "You did not just help me see it, Frank. You loved me into believing it. You saw past what everyone else saw and recognized something worth treasuring. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible." "We gave each other that," Frank corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, just moving from place to place with no real direction. You gave me purpose and home and a reason to build something lasting. We saved each other, Clara." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun finished setting, the air filling with the smell of dinner cooking and the sound of children's laughter. This was their life, built from the simple moment when a cowboy tasted bread and recognized the skill and heart of the woman who had made it. Built from Frank's willingness to see Clara fully, and Clara's courage to believe she deserved to be seen. In 1915, Clara and Frank celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary. Sarah and Peter hosted a large gathering at the bakery, which had grown large enough to accommodate the crowd. All three of their children were there with their spouses and children. The Chen family came, Mr. and Mrs. Chen now elderly but still spry, their children and grandchildren filling several tables. Friends from around Custer and the surrounding area attended, people who had come to respect and value Frank and Clara over the decades. Even some people who had once mocked Clara were there, including Mrs. Patterson, now a widow who had softened somewhat in her old age. She approached Clara with obvious discomfort. "Mrs. Vance," she said stiffly, "I wanted to say that your family is lovely. Your children have done very well for themselves." It was not quite an apology, but Clara recognized it as the closest Mrs. Patterson would likely ever come. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That is kind of you to say." After the older woman walked away, Frank leaned close to Clara's ear. "You are a better person than I am." "I would have told her to go to hell," Clara laughed, the sound full and rich. "I considered it, but I decided I would rather spend this beautiful evening celebrating what we have built rather than dwelling on old hurts." "That is why you are the better person," Frank said, kissing her temple. Thomas stood and called for everyone's attention, raising his glass. "I want to say something about my parents. Growing up, I watched them build this life from almost nothing. My father came to Custer with barely enough money for a meal. My mother was running a bakery but facing cruelty every single day because people could not see past her appearance to the incredible person underneath. They found each other, and they built something extraordinary. They taught us that love means seeing people truly, that family is about showing up and doing the work, that success is measured not in money or status, but in the relationships we nurture and the kindness we show." Sarah stood next to her brother. "Our mother taught us that skill and dedication matter more than what other people think. That you can create beauty and nourishment even when the world is telling you that you are not worthy. Our father taught us that defending the people you love is always the right choice, that gentleness and strength can coexist in the same person. Together, they showed us what a real partnership looks like. 30 years of love and work and building something meaningful. We are grateful to them and we love them." Clara wiped tears from her face while Frank's arm tightened around her shoulders. Around them, people raised their glasses in a toast to 3 decades of marriage, of love, of defying expectations and building something beautiful. Later that night, back in their house, Clara and Frank lay in bed in the comfortable silence of two people who had shared thousands of nights together. 30 years, Clara mused. "When you first asked me to marry you, I was terrified it would not last. That you would eventually see me the way everyone else did and realize you had made a mistake. And instead I love you more now than I did then," Frank said. "Every year, every day I discover new reasons to love you, the way you hum while you bake. How you always have a kind word for everyone, even people who do not deserve it. Your terrible singing voice when you think no one can hear you." "My singing voice is not terrible," Clara protested, laughing. "It is absolutely terrible and I love it." Frank rolled to face her, his hand cupping her face in the familiar gesture that still made her heart skip. "I love everything about you, Clara. I always have, and I always will. Marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did." "Marrying you saved my life," Clara said simply. "Not just from loneliness or cruelty, but from the belief that I was not worthy of love. You taught me that I deserve happiness, that my body does not define my worth, that I can be loved exactly as I am. You gave me that gift, Frank, and I will never stop being grateful for it." They made love that night with the comfortable familiarity of long marriage, a connection that went deeper than physical pleasure into the realm of souls recognizing each other. Afterwards, Clara fell asleep in Frank's arms as she had thousands of times before, safe and loved and home. The years after their 30th anniversary brought the usual rhythms of aging. Frank's hair went completely silver, and he moved a bit slower after a riding accident in 1918 left him with a lingering limp. Clara's joints ached on cold mornings, and she finally admitted she could no longer manage the early morning bakery schedule, leaving that entirely to Sarah and the staff Sarah had trained. But they were content, surrounded by children and grandchildren, respected in their community, financially stable after decades of hard work. They took pleasure in simple things like sitting on their porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over land they owned, talking about their days and their memories. In 1920, Clara published a second cookbook at the urging of her original publisher. The Western Baker returns. More recipes from the Black Hills, sold even better than the first, finding an audience among women who had grown up with Clara's original book and wanted more. The introduction included a brief biography of Clara's life, and she received hundreds of letters from readers who were touched by her story. One letter, from a young woman in Ohio, stayed with Clara. The woman wrote that she had always believed she would never marry or have children because of her weight, that she had accepted loneliness as her fate. But reading about Clara's life, seeing that someone like her could find love and build a family and achieve success, had given her hope. She ended the letter by thanking Clara for showing her that happiness was possible. "This is what it was all for," Clara said, showing Frank the letter. "All the cruelty we endured, all the fights we fought. If our story can give hope to even one person who feels the way I used to feel, then it was worth it." Frank read the letter and nodded. "You are changing lives, Clara, not just through your recipes but through your example. That is a powerful legacy." In 1925, Frank and Clara celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and a host of friends and extended family. Frank was 63, Clara 64, and they had built a life that exceeded anything either had imagined in those early days when a cowboy walked into a bakery and tasted bread that would change his life. Thomas ran the ranch now, expanded to over 300 acres and one of the most successful operations in the Black Hills. Sarah's bakery had locations in 3 towns, employing over 20 people and shipping goods as far as Rapid City. David had completed his veterinary training and opened a practice in Custer, serving the entire region and making a name for himself as one of the finest animal doctors in South Dakota. "We did good," Frank said, surveying the party that filled their house and spilled out into the yard. "Our children are happy and successful. Our grandchildren are growing up strong and kind. We built something that will last long after we are gone." "We did it together," Clara said. "Every step of the way, we did it together." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Clara found herself standing in the kitchen of the house Frank had built 40 years earlier. She looked around at the worn counters, the sturdy table that had hosted thousands of family meals, the window that looked out over land they had worked and loved and passed on to their children. This was home, built from love and determination and the simple choice to see past what society deemed acceptable to what was actually true. Frank came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as he had done countless times over 4 decades. "What are you thinking about?" "About bread," Clara said, laughing a little at how strange it sounded. "About how you walked into my bakery that day, and how you said my bread smelled better than anything you had encountered in months. About how that led to this, to everything we have now. It is strange how life pivots on such small moments." "It was not a small moment," Frank said. "It was the moment I found my home. I did not know it immediately, but some part of me recognized that I had found something precious, and I was not going to let it go, no matter what anyone said." Clara turned in his arms to face him, this man who had loved her for 40 years, who had stood beside her through mockery and celebration, who had chosen her every single day. "I love you, Frank Vance, more than I could ever express in words. I love you too, Clara Vance. You are my home, my heart, my everything." Marrying you was the best decision I ever made, and I would do it again in a heartbeat." They stood in their kitchen, two elderly people who had built a life together against all odds, and kissed with the passion of newlyweds and the comfort of old lovers. Outside, their family laughed and talked. Grandchildren chased each other through the yard. The sun set over the Black Hills, painting everything in gold. Frank and Clara Vance lived many more good years together. Frank died peacefully in his sleep in 1932 at the age of 70, surrounded by his family, his hand clasped in Clara's as it had been for 47 years. Clara mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. She continued to write, publishing a memoir in 1935 that told her story in full, from the lonely baker enduring mockery to the woman who built a life of love and success. Clara lived to be 83 years old, passing away in 1944, surrounded by the family she and Frank had created. Her funeral was attended by over 300 people, testament to the life she had lived and the impact she had made. She was buried next to Frank on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built, their headstones simple but meaningful. Their story lived on through their descendants, who told it to their own children and grandchildren. The story of the obese baker who was mocked daily, until a cowboy tasted her bread and recognized her worth. The story of Frank who saw past society's prejudices to the incredible woman beneath. The story of how love and determination built something beautiful and lasting from the unlikely foundation of a chance encounter in a small bakery in the Black Hills of South Dakota. The story of how choosing to see someone truly, choosing to love despite what the world says, can change everything. Their legacy was not just in the successful businesses they built or the land they acquired, but in the simple truth they proved through their lives, that every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are, that love has no size requirements, and that happiness is possible for anyone brave enough to reach for it and strong enough to hold on to it when the world tries to tear it away.